After escaping from the Bocas del Toro archipelago in early June 2010, Dayton and Laura crossed the border into Costa Rica, intending to lay low. The problem was that their faces were plastered across all newspapers and screens. In mid-July, they attempted to hide in a resort town an hour's drive from San Jose, but the hotel owners recognized them and called the police. With no real choice and the authorities on their tail, involving Interpol and the FBI, they decided to cross the border again. The natural border between Costa Rica and Nicaragua is the meandering San Juan River. On the 26th, Dayton and Laura stole a motorboat, tossing its owner into the water, and headed towards the Nicaraguan side. However, their escape was noticed by a group of soldiers. Confronted by a line of rifles, the fugitives surrendered. They were dressed in t-shirts, shorts, and flip-flops, appearing like clueless, lost tourists. However, their story didn't withstand scrutiny. They were handcuffed on the 2nd and taken to the nearest precinct. Cher Hughes and her husband Keith were enjoying life on a tropical island in Panama. It was a dream that initially seemed unattainable, to leave their mundane jobs, move to an exotic country, and acquire their own tropical island. Cher made it a reality in one of the most improbable places, among the tiny islands of Bocas del Toro, Panama. Cher grew up in St. Louis, where her beauty allowed her to enter the world of modeling at a young age. Later, she moved to Florida, where she started a company for innovative signage. She ran a successful business, was independent, and confidently pursued her dream of saving enough to travel extensively. She had traveled a lot, mainly within the USA, when a friend invited her to visit Bocas del Toro, and Cher couldn't pass up the opportunity. Bocas del Toro is the kind of place people go to escape the ordinary. A group of islands far from the coast of Panama and even farther from the beaten tourist paths. It's a place where life moves much slower and simpler. Cher visited the archipelago with her boyfriend Keith Whirl in 2000 and instantly fell in love with the picturesque land. It took them 7 days to decide where they wanted to spend the rest of their lives. With the money she had saved for traveling the world, she bought herself a piece of paradise. Cher and Keith had met 7 years prior in Florida when the attractive blonde walked into a bar owned by Keith. Seeing her big blue eyes and beautiful smile, Keith knew he was hooked. Keith was a carpenter and had built their dream home himself. He also owned several rental properties, providing them with additional income. Cher cultivated a garden and took in various animals, including a monkey and a Doberman pinscher named Jack, who adored Cher and followed her everywhere. Cher's and Keith's relationship blossomed on the island, and in 2005 they got married, surrounded by friends and loved ones. Cher had a great relationship with her family, and in the following years they often visited her in Bocas del Toro. Particularly in 2010, her sister Judy had planned to visit her. This would have allowed Cher to take her mind off things. The smooth flow of her 5-year marriage with Keith hit some rough patches, and Keith even left the island. Cher was distraught, but they still loved each other, and everyone around them was convinced that they just needed time to reconcile. Against this backdrop, Cher's sister was scheduled to visit, and the girls were excited about the upcoming reunion, constantly discussing joint activities. But suddenly, Cher stopped answering calls and messages. Judy realized something was wrong. She contacted Cher's friends in Panama, who informed her that Cher was not at home, probably having left. When Keith learned that his wife had left the island, he was surprised, but believed he knew where she was. Cher had talked about living in Panama City, a bustling city where she could blend in and contemplate her separation from her husband in a peaceful environment. For people living in Panama, moving back and forth was commonplace. That was part of the charm of the islands, but still, Cher couldn't have just vanished suddenly, leaving her home, belongings, and unanswered calls. Then her friends received a message from her saying she had gone swimming. It inspired them momentarily, but not for long. Several more days passed without a sign of her. Then another message arrived, this time for Keith. It read, "I met someone else. He is better than you," implying that she had left with him. Keith decided to get to the bottom of it. He called Cher's best friend directly and asked if his wife had another man in her life. The friend assured him that there was no such thing, and that Cher genuinely wanted to reconcile with her husband. She couldn't have run away. Keith noticed something else in his wife's messages. They were written in a style that was not typical of her. Even her emails were very well written, with no modern abbreviations, and the capital letter was only at the beginning of the sentence. But this message was written entirely in capital letters with abbreviations. Then the messages simply stopped coming. Cher's Aunt Mary contacted the embassy in Panama and asked for help. They replied that people disappear all the time, and if the niece wanted to be found, she would contact them herself. But when Cher didn't call her father on his birthday, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that she hadn't run away with a guy, wasn't hiding in an apartment in Panama. Something had happened. Her friends tried to figure out what had happened and remembered another American from their company who had also disappeared suddenly. Did anyone know anything about him? What if Cher wasn't the only missing person? On the picturesque islands of Bocas del Toro, a crisis was brewing. It had been 2 months since Cher had stopped communicating. Now her family and friends were questioning whether her disappearance was related to the disappearance of another American, Bo Islar, who had suddenly left the island 4 months before her. Bo was a pleasant but very quiet man. The former antique dealer had moved from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and was considered somewhat of a recluse, to the extent that few noticed when he suddenly vanished. In principle, he could have left without telling anyone, as it is easy to disappear from Panama. His action became even clearer when it was revealed that he had sold his house to William Adolfo Cortez, also an American living in Panama. Bo had mentioned to friends that he wanted to sell the house and move to a new place. Apparently, that's exactly what he did. But the memory of Bo's house continued to bother Keith, Cher's husband, after the man left. The house looked as if its owner had just stepped out for a minute to the store. Towels hung on the back of a chair, dirty dishes were piled in the sink. His shoes and cane were by the entrance. It was strange, so rumors began. 2 Americans had disappeared. Could their disappearances be related? When it was discovered that Bo had stopped paying his bills, which was entirely unlike him, mutual acquaintances of Bo and Cher became concerned and contacted the police. But they had no grounds to begin an investigation because 2 adults who had previously expressed their desire to leave had disappeared. Then, Bo and Cher's friends turned to someone who could help them. Another foreigner, Don Winner, the owner of a news site for expatriates living in Panama. Long ago, Don arrived in Panama with the American military intelligence and stayed there. The case of the 2 missing Americans caught his attention, so from Panama City he traveled to Bocas del Toro and simply started talking to the locals, trying to find out what they knew about the situation. Indeed, everyone confirmed that Bo and Cher couldn't have just disappeared and left everything behind. He checked and found out that Cher and Bo's passports hadn't left Panama. That meant they were still here. But where? There was another piece of the puzzle that pointed directly to a man living among them. Bo Islar was someone who had left last autumn. At the time, no one found it unusual, especially considering that he had sold his house to another foreigner, William Adolfo Cortez, known to everyone as Wild Bill. It should be noted that everyone on the island was simply called by their names or nicknames. For example, Keith and Cher were nicknamed Ken and Barbie. The owner of the local farm and bar was known as Wild Bill. Bill and his wife Jane had opened a bar in a remote area, accessible only by boat, where foreigners sometimes gathered for a drink or two. Usually, the flamboyant and charismatic Wild Bill stood out even among the fairly colorful personalities in Panama. He had established a local pirate club and was known for his lively parties. Don Winner delved deeper and found out that Bill had not only acquired Bo's house. Shortly after Bo disappeared, Bill and his wife became the president and secretary of a company they had created. Bill quickly renovated the house and advertised it for sale. It seemed like he was involved in buying and selling real estate. He had acquired a house in 2007 from the Brown family, who lived nearby Cher's house, the father, mother, and teenage son. Then he got Bo's house. However, it was only his next purchase that drew universal attention to him. Wild Bill unexpectedly announced that he had acquired all of Cher's property, including the island itself and the guest cottages built by Keith. Moreover, the island still had Keith's tools, Cher's belongings, and even her pets. Bill claimed that Keith would handle the matter with his wife when she returned. Keith requested at least the dogs and the tools back. Bill then returned 1 dog and several tools. Keith didn't intend to confront Bill, especially since everything was under Cher's name, and she did have the right to sell the property without informing her husband. But Keith couldn't believe it. They never fought over money. The island had become their home, and Cher simply wasn't the kind of person to act in this manner. Her relatives didn't believe it either. So Cher's Aunt Mary simply picked up the phone and called Wild Bill. She asked to see the property sale document. The man replied that he had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Mary asked to see the agreement and inquired if Cher had mentioned to Bill what she intended to do next. Bill stated that she had moved into an apartment in the capital. What about her belongings? Bill assured her that at Cher's request, he had sent her belongings, valuables, and money by air courier. Mary demanded to see the receipts for sending these things. She was convinced that Cher would never allow a barely acquainted man to rummage through her belongings in search of jewelry. There was more to it. No one could understand why Cher's entrusted dog, Jack, constantly jumped into the water and swam 2 kilometers to Bill's house again and again. However, Bill had many other concerns to think about besides the dog. Formerly cheerful and gregarious, he now tried to keep to himself, evading conversations. He was clearly nervous, and there was a reason for it. The more Don investigated the rumors, the more he became convinced that Bill was the key to finding Bo and Cher. It was a common denominator between the two of them. He had acquired their property, and both of them had disappeared. Don Winner decided to approach the official authorities and urged Kit to do the same. Kit went to the capital and informed the DIJ, the equivalent of the FBI in Panama, about everything. They did not brush him off and got to work. However, despite all the suspicions, there were no signs of criminal activity. There was essentially nothing to investigate. Then Don had an idea. He had heard a lot about how Wild Bill had an AK-47 and how he would sometimes shoot it to impress his friends. But in Panama, it is illegal for a civilian to possess such a weapon. Therefore, Don suggested that the police conduct a search, arrest him for possessing the weapon, and investigate what role he might play in the disappearance of the 2 people. And that's what they did. In July, officials flooded Wild Bill's house in uniform. The owners were nowhere to be found. The police began to search. They were looking for weapons when they saw Jack, Cher's dog. He had once again swum to Bill's house. The dog was behaving very nervously, circling around, barking at the policemen, and constantly running up the slope as if asking them to follow him into the jungle. The police officers, to their credit, followed Jack and found the spot where a pit had recently been dug. Kit was waiting at the foot of the hill at the time. He saw the officers climb up with shovels. They descended 2 hours later and asked him to look at something. In a shallow grave under a heap of garbage, the police found Cher Hughes' body. She had been shot once in the back of the head. It was only now that Kit began to understand why Jack kept returning to Bill's house. He would swim 2 kilometers and just stand there by his late owner's grave, but the horror did not end there. As the police continued to search Bill's property, they found another mound of land. Under it lay Bo's body. He had also been shot in the back of the head. Furthermore, in Wild Bill's house, the police found a mass of other evidence, documents belonging to Cher and Bo, as well as Cher's phone from which messages had been sent. The police issued an all-points bulletin for Wild Bill and his wife, Jane, whom they also considered involved in the crimes. But they were too late. The 2 had disappeared. Bill and Jane were on vacation when, on June 11, 2010, a friend informed them that the police were at their house. That same night, they left for Costa Rica, where they moved from hotel to hotel, but they were recognized there, and they made a desperate attempt to get to Nicaragua by boat, where soldiers intercepted them at a checkpoint. It was only then that it was revealed that the man's real name was William Dathan Holbert. 30-year-old Dathan had been evading the American police since 2006. He had an impressive criminal history that stretched from the white sandy beaches of Bocas del Toro to the mountains of North Carolina. It was there that he was born, played football on the school team, got married, became the father of 3 children, and worked as a landscape designer. He was well liked by his employer at the sports center until he embezzled $25,000. And that was just the beginning. Dathan quit his job and his wife and fled with Laura Michelle Reese, who later transformed into Jane Cortez. In 2005, he began to commit real estate fraud. He sold someone else's house for $200,000. By the time the house's owner found out what had happened, Dathan had vanished. Meanwhile, he sold a stolen car, and when he was pulled over for speeding in Wyoming, he simply fled. However, after the man moved to Panama, his crimes became more sinister. The people of Panama were horrified, but they did not know that Dathan had much more heinous crime under his belt. Now, behind bars, Wild Bill was ready to reveal all his secrets, to which the people of Panama were not prepared. 27-year-old Laura Michelle Reese gave absolutely no comments and refused to speak to the police. She claimed to know nothing about the family that sold them the house in Panama, how much her husband paid for the property, or who the decorations, chains, and bracelets of Cher Hughes, which were on Laura at the time of the arrest, belonged to. On the contrary, Dayton turned out to be surprisingly friendly and talkative. He was happy to return to Panama, happily conversing with journalists in Spanish. Dayton admitted that he invited Bo under the guise of a meeting with his lawyer regarding the sale of the house. He shot the man in the back of the head when he was driving him on his boat. As for Cher, it all started with friendly gatherings and dinners at his house. After that, he led her to see some animals behind the house, and when she turned to look at them, he killed her. The motive was obvious: money. He wanted to take possession of their property. But even the most experienced police officers were shocked when they heard what else Dayton had done. He drew a plan of his house, marking crosses where the bodies were buried. On his map, they counted not 2 crosses, but 5. Not only Cher and Bo died at the hands of Wild Bill, but also the father, mother, and their teenage son. The Brown family, one owners of Bill's house, Cher's neighbors. Dayton saw Michael Brown's advertisement for the sale of the house and called him. The men agreed to meet. Initially, Dayton planned to rob Michael, but when he saw his house in a remote, picturesque place, he changed his mind and decided to kill him and his family. Michael confided in Dayton and told him about his business. He explained that he managed capital through a shell company. Similar companies dealt with bearer shares. In essence, whoever owned the shares was the owner of the corporation. Michael's property in Panama also belonged to the company. If I kill him, Dayton pondered, the shares will be mine, and along with them, the real estate. So, being a guest in Michael's house, Dayton somehow asked the owner to show him the well he had dug on his property. He agreed and led him to the well. There, Dayton shot him in the back of the head. He returned to the house and told Michael's teenage son, Watson, that his father asked him to take a shovel and help him. He killed the son in the same way and in the same place as the father. Then he returned to the house and found Michael's wife, Manchitha Nankratok, in the garden. She was bent over, tending to the flowers. Dayton shot her too. To make sure that all 3 were dead, he fired an extra bullet into each. In the owner's cabin, he found documents and passwords from bank accounts. So he claims, although after the fate of the Brown family became known, there were rumors that Dayton tried to force Michael before killing him. Michael kept money in Hong Kong and transferred small sums to Panama. Dayton requested a new card with a new PIN because he didn't know the old one. He sent the request to Hong Kong because in Panama, they would have asked for identity confirmation. After some time, Dayton received the card in an envelope at the post office. All he had to do was say that he was picking it up for Michael Brown. In Bocas del Toro, such things are easier to do than said, boasted the man. In addition, Dayton confessed to killing another American, Jeffrey Klein. Dayton claimed that he died when they fought on a boat and that to avoid punishment, he devised his way of getting rid of the body. He buried him and then, after a few days, set up a picnic area near the burial site. After the truth came to light, people perceived him as a serial killer who kept victims' belongings in his house as souvenirs. But he himself claims not to be a serial killer. He does not deny the crimes and immediately confess to them, but they never gave him any pleasure. He did not wake up one morning with the decision to kill his neighbors. Dayton knows that he got what he deserved, but he cries and repents only for his wife, who now has to go through all of this. It will take 7 years to achieve justice. During this time, his wife divorced Dayton while the two were in prison. In August 2017, he was found guilty and sentenced to 47 years in prison, while his wife was sentenced to 26 years. If he has other victims, it will be practically impossible to find out. After all, Dayton mainly hunted loners before he met Cher. Choosing a sociable girl with a lot of friends and relatives who would not stop looking for her was his main mistake. It's no wonder they say that some people never disappear. Even while in prison before the trial, Dayton used his phone, computer, and internet access. He continued to log into his Facebook page and even became a sponsor of the prisoners' football team, buying them sports uniforms. Today, he serves as the chairman of the Christian Organization for Inmates, leads an international human rights organization for prisoners, was appointed a chaplain and later a pastor of the Catholic Church in prison. Finally, he acts as a mediator and negotiator between various aggressive prison gangs. On January 7, 2019, he married a local girl, Elizabeth Nunes, and confesses that he enjoys conjugal visits very much. At the end of the year, Dathan published his prison memoirs, in which he described his escape from the authorities, arrest on the Nicaragua-Costa Rica border, extradition to Panama, and the first years in confinement.